Hello everybody, this is the next part of Let's Read a Flush. Sorry it took so long. Chapter 19. Naturally the story was huge in the Island Examiner. The headline blared, "Casino Boat Busted in Pollution Probe." Miles Olmat wrote the article, which explained that the flushed waste was traced easily to the Coral Queen because the crud contained an highly visible, inky-colored substance. Inky-colored makes absolutely no sense. The front page of the newspaper featured an aerial photograph of our incriminating fuchsia stain. Not to brag, but it was impressive. As my father had predicted, the Coast Guard shut down the gambling boat right away. Dusty Muleman was not available for comment. Miles Olmat and a couple other reporters called our house and left some messages. They all wanted to interview Dad now that his accusations against Dusty had been proven true. The old Payne Underwood would have eagerly picked up the phone and ranted, but the new Payne Underwood took Donna Underwood's advice and let it ring off the hook. My father didn't need to say anything to the newspaper because everyone in town knew the truth by now. They knew he was right about Dusty after all. The following morning, Grandpa Bobby borrowed Dad's pickup and drove to Miami Beach to surprise Uncle Dell and Aunt Sandy. He said they were really happy to see him alive, but after a while they started acting kind of nervous and weird. They were probably freaking out, trying to think of a way to explain how they'd spent all the money that my grandfather had left in the bank box. A day later, he returned to the Keys and stayed with us for a week. One of the best times of my life. Even Abby got jazzed. Every night we'd stay up late listening to his Caribbean adventures. In the daytime we went snorkeling or crabbing or wakeboarding behind the skiff. One afternoon we took a metal detector to the sandbar where all the drunk tourists from Miami hang out. And we found $13 in change, 4 rings, 2 bracelets, a brand new Swiss Army knife, and somebody's gold molar. How do you lose a gold tooth at the beach? Like, seriously, how does that happen? Suddenly, over breakfast one morning, Grandpa Bobby announced he was leaving. Where? I asked. Dad answered for him. Back to South America. Grandpa Bobby nodded. You're not going to come hunting for me, are you, Payne? I want a promise. You've got it, my father said, not happily. Grandpa Bobby hitched a silvery eyebrow at my mother. Donna, I'm counting you to keep this hot-headed husband of yours from running off the rails. Mom told Grandpa Bobby not to worry. We'll miss you, Pop, she said. But why are you leaving? Abby blurted. Why won't you stay here with us? It's tempting, Tiger. It truly is, my grandfather said. But don't forget, the U.S. government thinks I'm dead. When the time's right, I'll be proud to march into the American embassy and stamp my fingerprint on a piece of paper and clear up all the confusion. But for now, it's useful that certain folks don't know I'm alive. I got some important business to clear up before I can come home for good. My sister bolted from the table, but she didn't get far. Grandpa Bobby snagged her as she dashed by and pulled her into his arms. He used his faded bandana to dry her cheeks. What if something bad happens? Abby cried. I don't want you to die for real. But I can't live for real until I finish this thing, he said. Please try to understand. He fished something out of his pocket. These are for you, Abby. It's only fair since your brother got the Queen's coin. Abby's eyes nearly popped out of her head. Whoa, she said, under her breath. We all leaned in for a closer look at the 2 green earrings. They were 2 green earrings. We just referred to them as something, but now apparently we were all on the same page that they're green earrings. The stones were small, but the color was brilliant, like reef water. Emeralds, Grandpa Bobby said. Mom was dazzled, too. I won't ask where you got them, she said. Probably another poker game, Dad remarked. Don't worry, I earned him fair and square, said Grandpa Bobby. I've been carrying him around for years, hoping to meet just the right girl. Now I have. He dropped the emerald studs into Abby's palm and said, Those little greenies are worth more than diamonds. They're worth even more than that, she said, to me. I'd never seen my sister so excited. After Mom helped her put on the earrings, she ran to check herself out in the hall mirror. Grandpa Bobby said, Abby, you're as lovely as your grandmother was. I only wish you could have known her. He looked at my father. And son, I wish... He didn't finish that sentence. Slowly he got up and went out the back door. Through the window we could see him sag against the trunk of our big mahogany tree. He was rubbing his eyes. Do you still remember her? I asked my father. Like it was yesterday, Noah. Then he went outside and put an arm around the old pirate's shoulders. Sometimes my parents drive me crazy, but the thought of losing either one of them is so unreal I can't imagine it. I can't even try to imagine it. All these years, I never considered the possibility that my father, my well-headed but occasionally whacked-out father, might be walking around with a broken heart, carrying a pain too awful to talk about. I mean, his mom died when he was a kid. Just died. How could anybody be the same afterward? How could there not be a huge, sad hole in your life? And how could it not get worse when somebody calls up to say that your father's gone too? The father that you idolized, dead and buried in some faraway jungle. So maybe Dad filled up all that emptiness another way. Whenever he saw something bad or wrong, he'd do just about anything to make it right, no matter how reckless or foolish. Maybe he couldn't help himself. I think Mom understood that. I think that's why she's been so patient with him throughout all these years. And maybe Dad will be better now that he knows that Grandpa Bobby is really alive. Something to hope for, anyway. On the afternoon before he left, my grandfather knocked on my bedroom drawer and said that he wanted to go fishing. We grabbed a couple of spinning rods and headed off to Thunder Beach. The water was crystal clear and we waded up to our knees. Scads of minnows flashed like chrome spangles in the shallows, and right away we spooked a snaggle-toothed barracuda that had been hanging motionless near a coral head. I'm sorry. Grandpa Bobby started casting a small yellow bucktail, hopping it through the grassy patches where the snappers hang out. "How are you going back?" I asked. "Same way I got here. There's a freighter leaving Key West for Aruba tomorrow," he said. "From there, I'll hitch a ride on a banana boat." "You sure about this?" Grandpa Bobby said, "Oh, I'll be fine. Your mom even packed me a suitcase." "Not the plaid one?" I asked. "Yeah. What does that mean?" "That's the one she takes out whenever she's thinking about dumping Dad." "Well, I guess that's not in the game plan anymore." My grandfather tugged the butt of the fishing rod under one arm and took out another old photograph to show me. "There she is," he said proudly. It was a picture of the Amanda Rose. She was a classic, too. "That was taken in Cat K," he said. "Summer before you were born. Wow. She's 46 feet, twin diesels, 800 horses." The gleaming sports fisherman was tied stern first to a wooden dock where a monster blue marlin hung glassy-eyed from a tall pole. In the picture, Grandpa Bobby's curly hair was so long it looked like a blonde afro. He was poised on the teakwood transom, raising a beer and a toast to the great fish. Okay, these are all tongue twisters. They're messing with me. "The dirtbags who hijacked my Amanda Rose, they've repainted the hull and changed her name, but that won't fly," he said confidently, "because I'll recognize her, no matter what." "But what if you can't find her?" I asked. "Oh, I most definitely will, Noah. You can bet the damn ranch on that." He didn't take his eyes off the photograph. "I built her myself. Started shortly after your grandmother passed away. It was this boat that carried me through these terrible times. That and raising your daddy and his brother and sister." He folded up the snapshot and went back to fishing. "All this might be tough for you to understand," he said quietly. "Not at all. 10 years is ridiculous, Noah. 10 years without so much as a postcard. I'm lucky your father forgave me. I wish I could have seen his face the night you showed up," I said. Grandpa Bobby laughed. "You know what he did? He jumped from the truck and snatched me up and swung me round in a circle like a doll, same as I did to him when he was a little shrimp. He got some serious muscle in his bones, your old man does. Hey, what's this? Finally somebody got hungry." He jerked up on the rod and reeled in a small blue runner, which he tossed back. He caught another one on the very next cast. "Hey, aren't you gonna fish?" he asked me. "Sure." I threw my bucktail into the deeper water and started bouncing it along the bottom. "How come you're so quiet?" he said. The truth was, I was as bummed out as Abby. I didn't want Grandpa Bobby to go again, but at the same time, I didn't want to make him feel guilty by saying so. He said, "You don't believe I'll ever be back, do you? I'm worried, that's all." It was impossible not to worry. The knife scar in his cheek was a pretty strong clue that the men my grandfather was chasing were not model citizens. Whatever else they say about me, champ, I do keep my promises. "Yeah, but hey, are you snagged on a rock?" "No, I don't think so." It was a fish. As soon as I set the hook, it smoked 30 yards of line off the spool. Grandpa Bobby whistled. "Probably just a big jack," I said. "Want to bet?" The fish fought hard, dogging back and forth across the flats. It made several more zippy runs, run right between my ankles, before I was able to steer it to the beach. My grandfather was right. It wasn't a jack. It was a fat pink snapper. Triumphantly, he pointed to the black telltale spot on its side. "That's a muttonfish, Noah." "Sweet," I said. It was the best snapper I'd ever caught. "How big do you think it is?" He smiled. "How big do you want it to be?" "Just the truth," I told him. "The truth? 6 pounds," he said. "But that's still one hell of a catch on a bucktail jig from a shoreline." I held the fish still while Grandpa Bobby unhooked it. You have to be super careful because snappers can bite through a human finger, no problem. "Noah, you hungry?" "I'm not." "Me neither." "Good," said Grandpa Bobby. He nudged the fish back into the water. It kicked its tail and tore off. "Must be some kind of mystic Underwood karma," he said. "This looks like the very same spot where I caught that nice mutton with your daddy. Gotta be 25, 30 years ago." How big was it again? I knew it was either 14 or 15 pounds, depending on who was actually telling the story. I was curious to hear which version Grandpa Bobby was in the mood for. He said, "Your daddy recalls it as 14 on the button, and his memory's likely better than mine. Still a beast. Yeah, but you got your whole life to catch one bigger. You'll do it too, there's no doubt in my mind. Because of the karma? Something like that," he said. "You done fishing?" "I think so." "Me too." We put down our rods and sat on the sand. With the change of the tide, a breeze had kicked up, blowing in from the direction of the lighthouse. We could see 2 tankers and a cruise ship, all northbound in the Gulf Stream. Another loggerhead turtle surfaced in the chop off the beach. It was twice as big and crusty as the one I'd seen with Abby and Shelley. This time, though, I didn't need to jump in and scare it away. Today, the water looked perfect, the way it did a million years ago, before people started using the ocean as a latrine. Today it was awesomely pure and bright, and totally safe for an old loggerhead to browse the grassy flats. Chow down, chill out, take a snooze. "Don't be surprised," Grandpa Bobby said, "if one sunny day you're swimming here at the beach, or maybe just taking a stroll with some girl, when a certain magnificent 46-footer comes hauling ass over that pearly blue horizon. Yours truly up in the tuna tower." The thing was, I could picture the moment perfectly in my mind. All I had to do was close my eyes, and there was Robert Lee Underwood streaking across the waves in the Amanda Rose. Now, Noah, I'm not telling you to sit around and wait for me. That would be downright pathetic. He laughed and chucked my arm. All I'm saying is, don't be surprised when the day comes. "I won't," I said. "Not even a little bit." All right, that's the end of the Grandpa Bobby saga. Chapter 20. The summer ended quietly, and that was fine with me. Rado came back from Colorado with an infected cactus needle in his chin, and Tom came back from North Carolina with spider bites in both armpits. How do you get spider bites in your armpits? Like, that makes no sense. I didn't have any gross wounds to show off, but I had the story of Operation Royal Flush to tell, which made both my friends wish that they'd been here to help. A few days after school started, a check for $1,000 arrived in the mail at our house. The check was made out to my father, who thought that it was a mistake. It wasn't. The Florida Keys are a national marine sanctuary, which means that the islands are supposedly protected by special laws against pollution, poaching, and other man-made damage. The sanctuary program offers cash rewards to anybody who calls in tips about serious environmental crimes. Dad's reward was $1,000. But I wasn't the one who phoned in about the gambling boat, he told the man at the sanctuary office. Then it was somebody using your name and phone, the man said. "If I were you, Mr. Underwood, I'd keep the money and forget about it." I purposely hadn't told my father that it was me who called the Coast Guard on Dusty Muleman the morning after we flushed the dye. If Dad had known, he would have insisted that Abby and I keep the reward. We figured he could use the money to cover some of the damage caused to the casino boat when he sunk it. Dad still had to repay Dusty, even though Dusty had been busted. So I felt pretty good seeing that check on the kitchen counter. It was $1,000 that didn't have to come out of my dad's pocket. Before long, my sister and I were so caught up with school that neither of us really thought much about the Coral Queen or about what might happen to Dusty Muleman. We just assumed that the government would put him out of business. After all, he'd been caught cold, dumping hundreds of gallons of poop into protected state waters. It was one of the worst cases ever documented in Monroe County, according to the Island Examiner. Are there a lot of cases in Monroe County of people dumping poop in the ocean? Is that like a thing or something? Meanwhile, something good was in the works. A bunch of the other fishing guides had written to the Coast Guard, saying Dad ought to be given one more chance with his captain's license. And to almost everybody's surprise, the Coast Guard agreed, but only if Dad finished his anger control therapy and got a letter saying he was all better. It was sweet news for the Underwood family. Although my father was making good money at Tropical Rescue, his patience for numbskull behavior was running out. Almost every night he'd tell us a new horror story about some macho moron driving a go-fast boat around and gouging out a 100-yard scar across the turtle grass. I had a feeling it was only a matter of time before Dad towed one of these knuckleheads somewhere other than the dock, somewhere very far away, where it would be a long, hot, miserable wait for anybody to find them. So we were all really amped to know that Dad would soon be back in his skiff, guiding for bonefish and tarpon and snook. Almost overnight, he seemed happy again, nearly as happy as when Grandpa Bobby had been here. Mom promised to take everybody out for stone crabs to celebrate when the big day arrived. But less than a month before the Coast Guard was due to return Dad's license, more trouble kicked up. I came home from school and found a large splintered hole in the center of our front door. There was another hole in the kitchen door, and still another one in the door to the hallway bathroom. It was impossible to not notice that each one of those holes was about the same size as my father's fist. Mom looked frazzled when she came down the hall. "What happened?" I asked. She shook her head somberly. "Your dad got some bad news." My knees started to buckle. I was afraid something terrible had happened to Grandpa Bobby. "It's about Dusty Muleman," my mother said. "His lawyers worked out some sweetheart deal with the government. He's reopening the Coral Queen tonight, throwing a big party for the whole town." I should have been ticked off too, but at that moment I was more worried about Dad. "Mom, tell me he didn't use his bare hands on the doors." "Oh, yes, indeed." Just thinking about it was painful. I said, "Who's teaching these anger control classes? Mike Tyson?" "It's certainly a setback," my mother said unhappily. "They've been counseling your dad to get rid of the negative energy the moment it enters his head. Somehow I don't think this is what they had in mind." "How bad is it?" Mom motioned towards the bedroom. "He's resting quietly now," he said. "Why don't you go have a talk with him? I got to pick up your sister from the piano lesson." Dad was lying down, watching cheesy old music videos on VH1. Each of his hands was covered by a plaster cast, and those casts were about as big as honeydew melons. He looked up with an embarrassed smile. "Could be worse," he said. "That's true. At least you're not in jail this time," I said. "And it was only the doors that got smashed. Those I can fix myself." I sat on the edge of the bed, trying not to stare. I still couldn't believe what he'd done to himself. "You really feel like you're improving?" I asked. My father nodded confidently. "I think the counseling helped, Noah. I honestly do." Like I said, sometimes he's on his own weird little planet. A video came on with a chubby guy dressed up like a woman, lipstick and all. Dad hoisted one of his casts and dropped it on the remote control. The TV screen went blank. "Be glad you weren't alive in the 80s, he said. "The worst music and worst hair in the history of the human race. That's no lie." That is something that exactly 0 people who have been alive in the 80s have ever said. Like, ever. "Mom's pretty upset," I told him. "I've been a disappointment to her. I realize that." Dad pulled himself upright and gazed out the window and didn't say anything for a while. "She'll be all right," I said, trying to break the silence. "Yeah, she's amazing. Rock solid." He turned to face me and cleared his throat a couple of times. "Noah, I'm going to tell you how things work in the real world. It might make you mad or sick to your stomach, whatever, but I want you to listen closely, okay?" I said sure and braced for one of his rants. "Do you know how much Dusty Muleman got fined for dumping his holding tank? For fouling nature with that awful crap? Guess what his punishment was?" My father was trembling with fury. 10,000 lousy dollars. 10 grand. That's what he makes in one stinking night off that casino operation. It's a joke. It's chump change to a rich maggot like that. Dad, take it easy. No. You need to hear this. You need to know. He hunched forward, eyes blazing. "Last year, a few young hotshots from the federal prosecutor's office in Miami drove down here for a private bachelor party with the Coral Queen. Do you know what a bachelor party is?" "No, but I'll be glad to do some research." I was trying to lighten the mood. "Yes, Dad, I know what a bachelor party is." "Don't be a smartass, son. Just listen and learn. The party gets a little out of control, okay? On the boat, there are some, well, let's be nice and call them dancers. Exotic dancers. I get the idea, Dad. Anyway, Dusty takes out a camera and snaps some pictures. Now, these are not the sort of pictures that a person would necessarily want to frame and hang on the living room wall." Hold on, I said. "You're telling me that Dusty Muleman blackmailed the government's lawyers?" "You blackmailed the government's lawyers with pictures of them hanging out with strippers." Florida. "Let's say he didn't hesitate to tell their boss what happened that night and what was on that roll of film," Dad said, "which I'm sure Dusty has locked away in a vault somewhere. Anyway, all of a sudden the feds are looking to cut a deal and close the case for a fine of $10,000. It would have been even less if it wasn't for lice peeking," my father said. "He showed up one day at the Coast Guard station and gave a secret statement, testifying about what he saw when he used to work on the casino boat. He swore that Dusty ordered the crew to flush the holding tank whenever it got full, as long as nobody was around to see." I smiled to myself. That was pure Shelley, forcing lice peeking to step up and tell what he knew. It was obviously part of the price he had to pay if he ever wanted to be her boyfriend again. "So Dusty agreed to cough up the 10 grand, Dad went on, "and he promised to never, ever again flush into the basin." "And they believed him? After all of this?" I asked. It was incredible. Oh, and dig this. To show how much he cares about the ocean, he offers to throw a big fundraising benefit for Save the Reef Foundation on the Coral Queen. He chuckled bitterly. It would be funny if it was a movie and not real life. Now I understood why he slugged the doors. If he didn't, it might just do the same thing to Dusty Muleman. So what happened to Luno? I asked. He's back in Morocco, probably living the high life, my father said. Dusty paid him off and put him on a jet in case the feds went looking for him. How did you find this out? I asked. Shelley told me, he said. She's slick. Dusty still hasn't got a clue that she was in on your sting. Dad was thirsty, so I brought him some water and tipped the glass to his lips. He said that 6 of his 7 knuckles had been fractured and the doctors weren't sure when the cast would come off. Till then, I guess I'm out of action, he said dejectedly, unless I learn how to steer a boat with my feet. But you're still getting back your captain's license, right? Absolutely, Noah. There's no law against punching out your own house. We heard Mom's car rolling into the driveway. Why don't you let me be the one to tell Abby about all this? I suggested. Good idea, Dad said, but be sure to leave out the part about the dancers. That night, I was jolted away by wailing sirens, one after the other. I figured there was a bad wreck somewhere on the highway. The clock by my bed said 4:20. Haha, 4:20. With all the noise, it took me a while to go back to sleep. The next thing I recall, it was daylight and Abby was shaking me by the shoulders. Get up, Noah, hurry, she whispered. The cops are here to arrest Dad. I jumped into a pair of jeans and ran to the living room. Abby was a half of a step behind me. My father was still in his pajamas and sitting in his favorite armchair. On each side of him stood a uniformed sheriff's deputy. I recognized one of them as that jowly guy from the jailhouse. Standing in front of Dad was a young, barrel-chested man wearing a shiny blue suit. The man was jotting in a notebook, except he wasn't a newspaper reporter. He was a detective. This is Lieutenant Shucker, said my mother. Abby and I nodded hello. We were real nervous, though not as nervous as Dad. Mom was pouring coffee into his mouth as fast as he could slurp it down. Mr. Underwood, what happened to your hands? Lieutenant Shucker asked. You didn't happen to burn them, did you? No, I didn't burn them. I broke them, my father said. Donna, show him the door. I'm not going anywhere, the detective said curtly. No, I mean show him the holes in the doors, Dad explained. Lieutenant Shucker examined the damage, but he didn't seem impressed. Where were you this morning? He asked my dad, between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. He's been right here with us, my mother interjected. That's right, I said. Dad was home this whole night. How do you know that for sure? The detective asked snidely. Abby looked like she wanted to bite him. Geez, mister, look at his hands, she said. He can't pick his own nose, much less drive a car. The 2 deputies began to snicker and then caught themselves. Mom's jaw tightened. Abby, that'll be enough from you. Dad tried to act indignant by folding his arms, but the casts were way too bulky for that. Officers, what is this all about? He demanded. Mr. Underwood, you have the right to remain silent, Lieutenant Shucker said. You also have the right to an attorney. Wait a minute, hold on, I burst out. You're arresting him? Not right this minute, the detective said, but we've got a lot more questions. He's definitely our prime suspect in the crime. What crime? Abby and I exclaimed in unison. Yeah, what crime? Asked my father. Burning down the Coral Queen, Lieutenant Shucker replied. It's called arson. Whoa! Plot twist! Did he really burn down that boat? When was the boat burned? Did something happen? I guess we'll find out in the final part of Let's Read Flush.